Hey everyone, and welcome. I'm Chip, and today we are at the Oregon-California Trails Association Library and Archives here in Independence, Missouri. And joining me is Travis Boley, the association's manager for OCTA, and also my boss. And today we're here to answer some of the questions we get asked most as Western historians. So, having worked here at OCTA for a while and as a historian, what is some of the more common questions you get asked specifically?
My most favorite question, and this goes back to my days as director of the Pony Express Museum in St. Joseph, Missouri. So my house, I think, might have been a Pony Express station. And I will continue to, okay, why do you think that? Well, I've been told that we're right on the Pony Express Trail and my house dates from that era. Okay, where's your house? Indiana or Illinois or Ohio or Arkansas. Of course, none of these states are on the Pony Express Trail. The Pony Express Trail largely lies on top of the Oregon and California Trail, which begins in Missouri and goes west. So I'm always a little amused by how a lot of people are familiar with these trails, obviously, but maybe not as familiar with the geography that they cover. And so that's one of our jobs, is to help combat that level of disinformation, to disabuse people of the notion that the Pony Express might have gone through Indiana, because it didn't. The same with the Oregon Trail. Yes, a lot of people might have started in Indiana, but we generally recognize independence here as the starting point.
You mentioned not understanding the scope of the West. I mean, we see that in the diaries and all of these, primary source artifacts we have of people just not understanding how long a journey was going to take, or how big these mountains are, or how just treacherous it was going to be.
Yes, in the 19th century there was a term for that. It was called seeing the elephant. Of course, traveling circuses were a thing in those days, and most Americans had never seen an elephant in person. And so seeing an elephant was seeing something very exotic, something new, something unexpected. And most people coming from the eastern United States then and now is woodlands. Once you get a little bit out of Missouri and into Kansas, those woods disappear. You're in tall grass prairie for hundreds and hundreds of miles, and then you're crossing the Rocky Mountains, then you're in the Great Basin, and you're in more desert environments. And yeah, there were a lot of struggles, whether it was cholera outbreaks or a lack of forage for animals, or the rare occasion of bad interactions with the American Indians, or getting over the mountains, or crossing the desert, or taking wrong turns. A lot of bad things can happen, but generally most people either died of sickness, disease, or accidental gunshots. It was very rare that you would be attacked and killed by somebody else, which I know Hollywood has popularized that notion, but it's largely not true.
So, well, we call it Western expansion, but it was only west for some.
That's true.
I mean, because there were, for the people living in Mexico, it was to the north. For people coming from Russia and China and East Asia, it was the east.
Yeah.
Like, so who primarily was going west in this context?
So, the vast majority of people who went west were obviously Americans and some Europeans that came to the United States. But word of the gold strike that happened in 1848 obviously got to Mexico first. California abuts Mexico. So late in 1848, you see a lot of people coming up, especially from Sonora, following up through Tucson and to what's now Phoenix, and crossing at Yuma, and then making their way across the deserts there, the Anza Borrego, which is a pretty harsh desert in San Diego County, making their way up the Central Valley of California. So it was actually Mexicans who poured in first. Up until very recently, that had been Mexico. The Mexican-American War had just ended. And
it was what, 1848?
Yeah, 1848. So gold was found right on the heels of that. And there was already established trade routes into China, so a lot of Chinese poured in as well, all from pretty much one province, that one province that had a lot of trade with the West. But you also see a lot of people from Australia pouring in. In fact, the Australians appeared to be a rather rambunctious lot, because once they got to San Francisco, they mostly engaged in crime. There was no law enforcement, and a posse started hanging Australians. So you get a lot of that as well. Yeah, it is kind of a misnomer, I think, to call it westward expansion. I think it's really, there's a better term, the whole world poured in, really. There's a book to that effect of really the whole world pouring in to California late 1840s, early 1850s. And then later, obviously, there's other strikes in Idaho and Montana and Nevada, and it kind of just spread throughout the West. People, including the Chinese, including Mexicans, including Australians, including lots of others from all around the world, poured into that area.
Well, before gold was discovered out there in California, why were people going west to begin with?
Well, you often hear the story of before gold, it's either land, or in the case of Mormons, it was for religious reasons. We also know in some circumstances it was likely for sex and gender freedom. We do have several documented cases of individuals who would, what we would call the LGBTQ crowd today. There was a particular stagecoach driver by the name of Charlie Parkhurst. Charlie ran stagecoach lines through California gold mining camps, and when Charlie died and an autopsy was performed, it was discovered that Charlie was born a biological female. Why this person chose to pass as a man is unknown. Obviously, a lot of people went west for religious reasons even before the Mormons. You had the Whitmans and you had other missionaries setting up various Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian missions throughout the West that met with varying degrees of success and failure. And the draw of land, obviously, was really important. Oregon was a disputed territory between England and the United States primarily, and it was President Polk's strategy to populate that area with Americans and just by default make it American. And the descriptions coming back were, this is basically paradise. You can grow crops. The climate is very mild. It's a great setting. Those were the main draws west. I would say land, God, later gold, and perhaps even just personal freedom, whether sexual or otherwise. You could get out of society. You could be your own person. You could largely do what you wanted in these virgin territories.
For a lot of the same reasons people were emigrating to the U.S. to begin with,
Yes.
Before then, for a couple hundred years, couple centuries.
Yes.
When they were going west, how many were they really in these covered wagon trains, as we've seen depicted in movies and things like that?
Certainly before 1849, almost everyone who went west did so with a covered wagon. Most people did not ride in those wagons. Shock absorbers were not yet a thing, and it would have been rather uncomfortable. So it's about 2,000 miles, and most people walked the whole way. Some people might have a horse and might ride that, but for the most part, people walked. And you had a wagon because you needed to carry anywhere from 4 to 6 months of provisions and any personal belongings that you might want to take. So a lot of people learned pretty quick that a lighter load gets there faster, and so the grand notion of taking a piano or a favorite piece of furniture, they were fairly quick to abandon that idea, if not through Kansas, then certainly by Nebraska, and you would start to see the leftovers, the remainders behind on the trail, and museums up and down the trail are strewn with those artifacts. You can still see them today in people's personal collections, and on occasion people are still unearthing them. You might find a wagon shoe, you might find a piece of a wagon, you might find an ox or a mule shoe, you might find a piece of a wagon, you might find an artifact.
So they weren't in a single line, nose to tail following each other. They would spread out.
Yeah, typically
kind of parallel because they're not wanting to eat each other's dust. And
that's right. You usually wouldn't see, except in tight quarters, like if you're going through a canyon or trying to cross a river, there would be a single file line. For the most part, you're crossing the plains. It's dry and dusty. If you've got 20 wagons in your wagon train, you're most likely spread out 20 wide. And so when we're out in the field and looking for wagon ruts or swales, a lot of times, almost all the time, you'll find multiple parallel lines of these wagon ruts going through the landscape.
Yeah, as we saw when we were out in California recently, we could see about a half dozen of them just.
Yeah, we have a member named Dave Freeman who's working in a place in Northern California known as Lassen's Ranch. There are so many parallel wagon roads and cutoffs and just parallel ruts. I think Dave is starting to lose his mind trying to document them all. He sent me a map not long ago just showing just how difficult this is to unravel and figure out exactly what's the main route, what's a secondary route. We may never know, but they're all really well preserved on private property on a ranch.
So a lot of people really did die of dysentery crossing the river. And
they did. That Oregon Trail video game largely got that right. That fun t-shirt that you see, "You have died of dysentery," was a very unfortunate reality beginning in late 1848, 49 into 1850. And every few years throughout the 1850s, some routes would be designated as that's a cholera route or that's a dysentery route, don't go that way. And so a lot of cutoffs started being created, other routes to the west. They all largely start here, roughly, in a parallel line from Kansas City north and south, whether that's Fort Smith, Arkansas, or Omaha, Nebraska, or anywhere in between. People are largely jumping off from what was then the American frontier. Up until 1854, the western border of Missouri was the end of the United States.
I was going to ask if people brought their pets on the trail, but is that going to get super dark?
Yes, people did bring their pets on the trail. There is an early story from 1842 of a particular wagon train that didn't get very far out of Missouri, maybe 10 or 15 miles. Today, it's a town known as Olathe, Kansas. It didn't exist then, but the wagon train held a vote. They decided that the dogs might draw unwanted attention from wolves and possibly American Indians, and so they elected to shoot their dogs. And the dog shooting did begin, and it's well documented in diary entries. But there was one gentleman who decided he didn't want to see his dog shot, and so he basically said, the next person who tries to shoot my dog will catch the next bullet after that, and thus ended the spate of dog killing. But the accounts are pretty heart-wrenching. You read of dogs cowering beneath their mistress's skirts, trying to hide. Yeah, it's really upsetting to hear. I myself own 2 dogs and couldn't imagine. I would have turned around and said, well, I guess, Oregon and California aren't for me. I'm going to stay here in Independence because you're not shooting my dog. But after that, people did go west with their pets.
Oh yeah, we've got Roman graveyards full of tombstones for people's pets, and yeah, we like our pets. Mm-hmm. Coming up here in the future, Travis and I are the ones that run the YouTube page here. It's just the 2 of us. But coming up here, we have some things we've been working on of stories of people on the trails that really haven't been shared before.
I'll just speak to that a little bit. So we did just recently take a trip to California. We spent a lot of time at Johnson's Ranch with our chapter president, Bill Holmes. We spent a lot of time at Lassen's Ranch with one of our members, Dave Freeman. They've done extensive work on both of these. They're private property, so the general public can't get access to either of those locations, but we can bring you there with the power of cameras and permission from landowners. We always do ask, of course, that you be respectful of the private property. Just because we're showing you what's there doesn't mean you should go there. Doesn't mean certainly you shouldn't go there and collect anything. But we really felt it was vital that these 2 really special places that are super preserved, and we have really good private landowners who are excited about the history that's on their property, so much so that we're looking to have our annual gathering in Chico, California in 2026, and hopefully be able to offer tours to people that want to access these private parcels of property and see the really well-preserved bits of trail and old towns that used to be there. And
well, how can people get involved with OCTA?
Well, the best way to get involved with OCTA is to simply join. We are a membership organization. If you go to OCTA-trails.org, click on membership, all of the information is there. If you live
links
from Missouri to the West Coast, we probably have a chapter for you. We have 11 chapters from the Kansas City area all the way to the Pacific Coast. That's a really great way to get involved locally, is to involve yourself with your local chapters. It's also a great way to get personalized tours from the most renowned trail experts alive today. It's a great way to get invited to speakers and other events, and to just meet like-minded people who want to do what you want to do. We have everything from genealogy to trail mapping and marking to storytelling, having people do public speaking at service groups and spreading the word of what it is we're trying to do. And what it is we're trying to do really is preserve and promote this history. In an era of great development in the American West, with all of the threats to natural resources, whether that's drilling or mining or electrical lines or windmills or solar arrays, they all present a direct threat to this history, and we would very much like to preserve it. We're not opposed to any of those types of developments. What we try to do is work with developers to maybe move their developments a little bit away from what it is we're trying to preserve, and especially on public lands. We do have quite a bit of success with that. We do have some laws that protect trails on public lands. That's not the case on private land. We're very, very reliant on private landowners to preserve what they have, and we're always very thankful for that. But yeah, there's a lot of great ways to get involved. Click around on our website. You'll see all of the various committees and things that we involve ourselves in. Join, come to an outing. If you've got any interest in this at all, this is definitely your group.
All right. Well, thank you, Travis. Thank you for your time today. And
Thanks,
thank
Chip.
you, everyone, for watching. And we'll see you next time.